Coming up on The World Today. Defense lawyers set to present evidence denying charges former President Donald Trump incited insurrection in the January 6th Capitol riots. MPs urge UN to investigate gross human rights violations in Myanmar. Plus, Russia warns the EU it could cut ties over sanctions. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Akaite Afia. It's day 4 of former President Donald Trump's impeachment trial at the U.S. Senate, and his defense lawyers are set to present evidence denying charges that he incited insurrection in the Capitol riots on the 6th of January. The team has indicated it may take up only 4 of its 16 hours and so move the impeachment trial to a speedy end. Democrats spent 2 days putting their case, including video footage of the violence, and arguing acquittal could see a repeat of the attack on Congress. Let's take a look at the highlights from day 3.
On the impeachment trial's third day, Democratic prosecutors provided examples of Donald Trump's actions prior to the rampage to what House managers say illustrate his intentions when he told supporters to go to the Capitol and fight like hell as Congress gathered to formally certify President Joe Biden's win over him.
Senators, the evidence is clear. We showed you statements, videos, affidavits that prove President Trump incited an insurrection that he alone had the power to stop. And the fact that he didn't stop it, the fact that he incited a lawless attack and abdicated his duty to defend us from it, the fact that he actually further inflamed that mob, attacking his vice president while assassins were pursuing him in this Capitol, more than requires conviction and disqualification.
The impeachment managers also recounted the president's many lawsuits against state election boards and threats against officials, many in his own party, and criticism of his own vice president. They warned that if Senate does not convict Mr. Trump, another attack is possible.
When President Trump incited a lawless mob to attack our process, he was attacking our democracy. He was trying to become king and rule over us against the will of the people and the valid results of the election. For the first time ever in our history, a sitting president actively instigated his supporters to violently disrupt the process that provides for the peaceful transfer of power from one president to the next. Think about that for a moment. What if President Trump had been successful? What if he had succeeded in overturning the will of the people in our constitutional processes? Who among us is willing to risk that outcome by letting Trump's constitutional crimes go unanswered?
The Democratic-led House on January the 13th charged Mr. Trump with inciting an insurrection. His term ended on January the 20th. A 2/3 majority in the Senate will be needed to convict, which means at least 17 Republican senators would have to defy Mr. Trump, who remains popular with most Republican voters and has shown interest in running for president again in 2024. 5 people, including a police officer, died in the riot. 2 more police officers involved in the response died by suicide in the days afterward. Donald Trump is the first U.S. president to be impeached twice and the first to face trial after leaving office. His first impeachment trial, which stemmed from his efforts to pressure Ukraine to investigate President Biden, ended in an acquittal a year ago in what was then a Republican-controlled Senate.
Our Washington, D.C. correspondent Maria Byrd joins us now for more. Maria, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So the ball is now in Trump's lawyers' court. What can we expect from the former president's defense team?
We can expect to see that the defense team is really going to focus in on the fact that, this was not the president and really focusing, even though They've already said that they've moved forward with the proceedings of this case. They're still going to focus on the unconstitutionality that they believe of impeaching a president that is no longer in office. So that's going to be a huge part of it. They're going to really try to focus on the constitutional piece of it. They're going to focus on the framers. They're going to focus on those things that would potentially convince Republicans that are very much constitutionalists to look at this case not from the graphic details of the Democratic Party and the impeachment managers, but really looking at this from, is it constitutional to impeach a president who is no longer in office?
And well, we've also heard that they are likely to only take 4 out of the 16 hours that they've been given to argue their case. What's the reason for this?
This is really so they can stay focused on the point at hand. I mean, I think they're going to not try to go too long, because going too long would then force them to go into details of what the Democrats have brought forward as a horrific event on January the 6th. It's very clear that the Democrats have brought forth the very graphic details that I think have shocked many Americans, because much of the footage had never been seen before. And I think it really hit the hearts of whether you were a Democrat or Republican senator, as you remember being in those chambers in the Capitol on that day when you feared for your life. And so because of that, I think they're going to try to focus strictly on the constitutional pieces and try to stay away from the emotional components that could come out during a more longer drawn out case when they are brought up for the 4 of the 16 hours.
Well, as you did mention, the Democrats' argument has been quite strong, backed up by new graphic video footage of the riots. But has this been enough to sway some Republicans to eventually vote against Trump?
You know, that is the real question. I think that there are so many Trump loyalists that still exist within the Senate, which we know that was his plan all along throughout his administration, was to really try to ensure that those individuals that supported his ideologies and his vision were put into Senate seats. And so for those Republican Senate seats that have been filled. And so we're now in a position that these Republicans, the 17, we need additional 17 in order for this impeachment to go through. It's highly unlikely that you will have 17 more Republicans to vote in support of the president being, and the former president being impeached, even despite the emotional graphic videos. The challenge that these Republicans are going to face, though, is many of their constituents were shocked, were very much hurt by those graphic videos and by the testimonies in the case from the Democrats. And so they will have a real questioning and a reckoning day with their constituents if they vote and do not support what the Democrats have put forward as a potential impeachment of former President Donald Trump. But again, there's just so many loyalists within the Senate that it will be very difficult to get that 2/3 vote.
Yes, well, it is day 4, and it's hard to know what former President Donald Trump is thinking without his social media pages. But what have you been hearing? What's on ground about how he's been reacting to everything that's been happening at the U.S. Senate?
Well, you can guarantee that despite the fact that he's not on social media, you are definitely hearing from him through he's contacting those who are his supporters, those in the Senate, making sure that they're sticking with him. We obviously knew he was not very happy on the first day of the way the opening arguments went with his attorneys. And so you're hearing some scuttlebutt about his reaction to some of what's happening, but it's very assured that he is definitely reaching out to those senators, because right now it's less about what the people are feeling about him and more about the senators voting for him. And so I think that's his focus now, is to ensure that he gets those senators that are loyal to him to stay loyal and to vote in a direction that would not have him impeached for a second time.
All right. Well, Maria, we will be keeping a close eye on the situation there. And thanks so much for giving us further clarity. Do stay safe out there.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, now to the COVID-19 pandemic. U.S. President Joe Biden has criticized the coronavirus vaccination program that he inherited from his predecessor, Donald Trump. President Biden says the United States would not have enough coronavirus vaccine doses by the end of the summer to vaccinate all Americans. Now, he made that remark during a visit to the viral pathogenesis laboratory at the in a suburb of Washington.
Exactly. The president has been clear since long before he came into office that he's open to engaging with both Democrats and Republicans in Congress about their ideas. And this is an example of doing exactly that. So as we said in our statement last night, it's an exchange.
The European Union hopes to start giving out money from its 750 billion euros coronavirus economic recovery fund before the end of the summer. Speaking at a news conference with European Parliament President David Sassoli and Portugal's Prime Minister Antonio Costa, marking the signing of the recovery fund, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called on the bloc's 27 member states to move quickly now to approve a linked decision to allow the Brussels-based EU executive to borrow the funds on the market. EU countries will get a share of the money in grants and cheap loans to help them lift economies mauled by the coronavirus pandemic, from a record recession, promote green growth, and beef up digitalization.
We have the common goal in the European Union to vaccinate 70% of the adult population till the end of the summer. And this sets, of course, a date that is very clear. The summer ends normally on the 21st of September. And this also shows that, of course, we are aiming to be before done with the ratification of the own resources. The moment the own resources decision is ratified, the Commission will go to the market, raise money, and disperse.
Some 300 Myanmar MPs have urged the United Nations to investigate gross human rights violations they allege have been carried out by the military. In a letter to the agency's Human Rights Council in Geneva, MPs accuse Myanmar security forces of shooting anti-coup protesters. Earlier, the UN Human Rights Envoy to Myanmar said there was evidence that forces had used live bullets. Protests continued today in defiance of a plea from the army chief. Genming Aung who the army installed as the country's military leader, called for unity to prevent disintegration as the country marks the Union Day holiday. Demonstrators are demanding the release of detained elected leaders, including Aung San Suu Kyi. Meanwhile, China says the military coup in Myanmar is an internal matter, but says it is working to foster a return to normalcy. Chen Zhu, China ambassador to the UN in Geneva, told a special session of the Human Rights Council, which was called by Britain and the European Union, quote, what happened in Myanmar is essentially Myanmar's internal affairs. Speaking at the same session, Mark Hassir, U.S. Charge d'Affaires at the U.S. mission to the UN in Geneva, called for other UN member states to join his country on holding Myanmar coup leaders to account, including through targeted sanctions such as those imposed on Thursday.
We ask all council members to join the United States and others to, 1, urge the military to immediately release all those unjustly detained, including politicians, civil society representatives, journalists, foreign nationals, and human rights defenders. 2, urge the military and police to restore power to the democratically elected government, demonstrate respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, and refrain from further violence against peaceful protesters. 3, urge the military to lift all restrictions on access to information, including by maintaining telecommunications and internet access. 4, join us in promoting accountability for those responsible for the coup, including through targeted sanctions.
Still to come on The World Today. Millions in China and other Asian countries celebrate Lunar New Year with scaled-down celebrations due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Thanks for staying with us. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Russia is ready to sever ties with the EU if the bloc imposes new economically painful sanctions. The EU has raised the prospect of further sanctions amid a row over the treatment of the jailed Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. When an interviewer asked if Russia was heading for a break with the EU, Mr. Lavrov said, quote, "We're ready for that." In the past week, Russia and the EU have expelled 3 of each other's diplomats in a tit-for-tat dispute centering on the Navalny case. VOA correspondent Charles Main is in Moscow, from where he joins us for more on this. Charles, good to see you.
Good to see you again.
So tell us, after this tit-for-tat actions over the past week now, are there talks of sanctions? The EU-Russia relationship is nearing even more dangerous waters. Are there any plans to resolve this before it escalates even further?
Well, first of all, it's important to point out the relations aren't very good as it is. There are already sanctions on Russia from the EU and vice versa from Russia on the EU. So this latest, as you mentioned in this foreign ministry interview, we heard from the Kremlin today. Their spokesman said he walked it back a bit. He softened up the language. He said, of course, we want good relations with the EU, but there's no doubt there's just a gulf between their views on this Navalny case, what's happening with this opposition leader, Alexei Navalny. Mr. Navalny's provided a list of sanctions, people that he would like to see sanctioned by the European Union. And these are many of, frankly, Vladimir Putin's very close friends, and certainly people well connected within the Kremlin. That obviously angers the government. They portrayed this effort as essentially sabotage and essentially traitors, Navalny being a traitor to his country by pushing for this. The question is how the Russian public sees it, I think. Will they see this as an attack on the economy and trying to sort of destroy Russia, as the government portrays it? Or will they see it as something that fits more within Navalny's message, which is that these people are corrupt and you need to take them down? Also, it's probably important to point out here that it is really difficult to cut off ties with the European Union for several reasons, and that comes from both sides of the equation. Russia provides a third of Europe's gas. There are big projects like the Nord Stream 2 with Germany that provide even more gas coming forward. And both sides have been reluctant to cancel that. And let's not forget also we're in the middle of a pandemic here with the Sputnik V vaccine. Russia's providing some vaccines going forward as well. And some of the European countries have signed deals for that. So I suspect it's in both sides' interest to keep this going in some form. But clearly there's big differences over Navalny.
Well, speaking of Navalny, he is back in court, this time for slander. So after the almost 3-year jail sentence handed to him last week, could he be looking at even more time behind bars?
Well, technically from this case, no. The purpose of this is essentially he's being accused of insulting a World War II veteran when he was critical of this constitutional reform effort over the summer. There was essentially a promotional message provided on state television that he insulted the people, or certainly the message that was being provided. So I think most people see this, though, for what it is. Essentially, it's an attempt to try and World War II is Russia's most sacred the war effort is sacred here. And I think it's an attempt to delegitimize and make Navalny really unappealing to many Russians by saying, look, he's even insulting a veteran. So whether that works, we'll have to see. But that seems to be the effort here.
Well, we have been seeing weekly mass pro-Navalny demonstrations, and several people have been detained. So are we likely to see the same scenes playing out over the weekend?
We'll have to see. Frankly, it's been over 10,000 detained nationally over the last few weeks. First of all, Navalny's team said that they actually were looking to do no more rallies until spring or summer because, in fact, so many people had been detained. They shifted gears. There was a bit of infighting in terms of the opposition, in terms of what the right strategy was. We've seen since then Navalny's team come up with kind of an alternative message, which is we want to have ways to show some solidarity and support among people who think as we do. But do it in ways that are less provocative to the authorities and less likely to have people arrested. So they're on Sunday, on Valentine's Day, they're asking people to just step out into their courtyards and hold up their cell phones. And it's kind of a solidarity message. The Kremlin is taking it very seriously, however, even though there's been a lot of people within the opposition who think, well, what's the point of that? And they're threatening to say, look, if you do this, there's a risk of being arrested or something else happening to you. So we'll just have to see how many people are spooked by that message from the government, and how many people feel insulted by that message from the government, saying, this is my home, this is my courtyard, and I'll do what I want.
Well, Charles, we will definitely be keeping an eye on the situation there. You do stay safe and have a great evening.
Thanks so much. You too.
Thank you. People across Beijing are celebrating Lunar New Year's away from many of their loved ones, as travel warnings amidst the pandemic have deterred many from making their traditional trip back to their hometowns. Artistic performances listed as intangible cultural heritages, such as the Dragon Dance and Stilt Walk, were staged in East China's Zhejiang and Jiangsu provinces, conveying the locals' wishes for a peaceful, happy, and prosperous New Year. The Lunar New Year is ordinarily the world's biggest annual migration, when hundreds of millions of China's migrant workers return to hometowns. But China has discouraged holiday travel after recent outbreaks forced widespread testing and quarantine requirements, despite earlier success in reining in the 2019 outbreak that also disrupted last year's Lunar New Year festivities. Colorful lights and lanterns have been an indispensable part of the Lunar New Year celebration for people in the Zhejiang city of southwest China's Sichuan province for nearly 1,000 years. This year, the lantern show has been presented online for the first time, bringing fresh enjoyment to residents. Meanwhile, hundreds of Taiwanese braved heavy rain to ring in the Lunar New Year, burning incense to pray for good fortune for the year of the ox. Temple-goers gathered outside of the new Taipei city's Zulin Mountain Buddhist Temple at around midnight to watch a fireworks display before queuing up to burn incense sticks and paper jaws. The tradition is meant to bring good fortune in the new Lunar New Year, and the temple is a popular spot for locals to congregate during major festivals. Taiwan, which has kept the pandemic well under control thanks to early and effective prevention methods, has been unnerved by some new domestic transmissions in recent months. The government canceled and postponed some of official celebrations for the Lunar New Year as the island recently reported 4 locally transmitted cases of COVID-19, which is the biggest daily rise in local infections in nearly 11 months. Inspired by the many videos posted on social networks featuring the hashtag Jerusalem Challenge that thrilled millions of people from Africa to Australia in 2020, German medical staff in Kiel decided to do their own video. Their video starts with medical staff arriving at the entrance of the hospital, turning on the music, getting everyone moving in an explosion of joyful and festive choreographed dancing. Halls, operating rooms, and helicopter pads are filled with high spirits as nurses, doctors, paramedics, and even firemen dance to the contagious and feel-good Jerusalem song. The number of new daily infections in Germany has been falling in the past few weeks, but the country will extend restrictions until March 7th due to growing concerns about the impact of more infectious variants of the virus in case numbers. But frontline workers here are not letting anything dampen their spirits. Well, dancing is always a great way to keep your spirits high. That is all for the program today. I'm Akaite Afia. Have a great weekend and stay safe.